The sun had set over the rugged landscapes of Burkina Faso, casting long shadows on the dusty roads of the capital, Ouagadougou. A figure stood alone, his silhouette sharp against the fading orange sky. Ibrahim Traoré, a man who had once been an unknown military officer, was now a symbol of resistance. The world had underestimated him, but today he would show them that the strength of a nation cannot be bought. He looked out into the distance, not at the tranquil city, but at the quiet battlefield ahead. This was a fight for the soul of his country, and he wasn't alone. The heat of the day lingered in the air, thick with the scent of dust, sweat, and the promise of change. The capital city hummed with the quiet murmur of its people, the pulse of daily life. Streets lined with small markets, vibrant with the colors of fresh vegetables, fabrics, and spices, buzzed with activity. Yet beneath this surface, something much deeper was stirring. Ibrahim Traoré, at just 37 years old, walked down the bustling streets with a quiet determination. He moved through the crowds with the grace of a man who had found his calling, his sharp eyes betraying no fear. His country was in peril, and the future of Burkina Faso weighed heavily on his shoulders. But Ibrahim had not always been the man he was now. There had been a time when he had been just another officer in the army, a young man with dreams of serving his country. At that time, the government had promised prosperity and stability, but Ibrahim had soon seen that these promises were empty. Corruption had taken root deep in the heart of the system. Greed had tainted the once idealistic notions of leadership, and the people had paid the price for it. Ibrahim had watched, helpless at first, as foreign powers, including Western oil companies, set their sights on Burkina Faso's land and resources. These companies were not just interested in oil, they wanted to exploit the country's precious resources without regard for its people. The government, in turn, welcomed them with open arms, offering up their country's wealth as if it were theirs to give away. The foreign oil companies, powerful and slick, were emboldened by the corrupt officials who were ready to sell out their own people for the promise of personal gain. They moved in quickly, planning to establish massive drilling stations on the rich land of Burkina Faso, threatening to destroy entire ecosystems, displace farmers, and poison the very resources that the people had relied on for generations. The country's future seemed as fragile as the land they sought to exploit. But Ibrahim was not willing to stand by and watch his country be sold. The corruption had stirred something deep inside him. It had awakened a fire he had long tried to suppress. He knew that this was no longer just about the oil. It was about the freedom of the people, their sovereignty, and their right to control their own destiny. The anger and frustration he had kept buried for so long turned into a quiet but unshakable resolve. The people of Burkina Faso would not be sacrificed for the greed of foreign corporations. The fight, he knew, would be long and difficult, but it was a fight he was prepared to lead. His family, too, had been a part of this struggle. His father, a war hero, had fought for independence from the colonial powers. His mother had lived through the hardship of post-colonial struggles. They had both taught him that freedom wasn't something that was simply handed over. It was something that had to be fought for, every day. Their sacrifices, their struggles, had shaped him into the man he had become. But now it was Ibrahim's turn to carry the weight of their dreams, their hopes, and their legacy. The resistance he formed was a far cry from the organized military forces of the oil companies, but it was powerful in its own way. The movement was born out of the people's frustration with the system, their willingness to fight for what was rightfully theirs. Ibrahim became their leader not because of his rank or his military prowess, but because of his belief in their cause. He wasn't a politician, he wasn't a diplomat, he was just a soldier. But he understood something that the foreign powers didn't. He understood the heart of his people. As the resistance grew, so did the pressure. The oil companies had the resources, the political backing, and the media influence to make their plans come to life. They were relentless, and they thought they could buy anyone who stood in their way. But what they didn't account for was Ibrahim's unyielding determination. Every piece of land they took, every piece of his country they tried to steal, was met with resistance. Not just from Ibrahim, but from the farmers, the workers, the teachers, and the everyday citizens who had long been oppressed. It was on a dark, quiet night when Ibrahim first learned about the full extent of the oil company's plan. A group of informants had uncovered the secret dealings between the foreign companies and the corrupt government officials. The emails and documents were clear. Millions of dollars had already changed hands. The oil companies had paid off government officials to allow them to drill in the heart of Burkina Faso, and in return, they were promised a steady stream of profits that would flow directly into the hands of a few powerful elites, the people. They would be left with nothing. Ibrahim knew the stakes had never been higher. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. But this was more than just a military operation. It was about winning the hearts of his people, about making the world see the injustice that was unfolding in his country. He didn't just need to defeat the oil companies. He needed to expose their corruption for the whole world to see. He needed to show them that the people of Burkina Faso were not afraid, that they would stand against the greed and exploitation that had held them back for far too long. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the country grew. Ibrahim's resistance was making noise, drawing attention from the international community. The oil companies, their government allies, and the corrupt officials of Burkina Faso knew that their plans were under threat. But it wasn't until Ibrahim made a shocking move that the full scale of his resolve was revealed. He sent out the confidential documents to international news outlets, exposing the full extent of the corruption. The revelation shook the world. News outlets from across the globe picked up the story. Protests erupted in cities around the world. People demanded accountability for the actions of the oil companies and their government partners. The pressure on the corrupt officials was immense. But what no one expected was Ibrahim's quiet confidence. He wasn't just fighting for his people, he was fighting for a future where no one could silence their voices again. The twist came swiftly. Just as the international community began to make its demands, Ibrahim received an unexpected message. It came from the CEO of one of the largest oil companies in the world. The email was simple, but chilling. "We know who you are. We know what you're doing. You cannot win." Ibrahim sat back, a quiet smile forming on his lips. He had already won. The people were behind him. The truth was out, and the world was watching. The oil companies and the corrupt government could no longer hide. The battle was shifting. The world was no longer on their side. It was on the side of the people of Burkina Faso. Months passed, and as the pressure mounted, the government had no choice but to take action. The oil companies were forced to halt their plans. The international community, inspired by the courage and unity of the people of Burkina Faso, pressured the companies to back down. For the first time in a long while, the country's leaders had to listen. Ibrahim had done it. He had turned the tide, and his country had won back its future. It was a quiet evening when Ibrahim stood on the balcony of his small home, looking out over the horizon. The land stretched out before him, rich with promise and potential. The sun had just set, and the air carried the fresh scent of rain. For the first time in a long while, the country felt at peace. Ibrahim knew that while the battle for Burkina Faso's freedom had been won, the real work was only just beginning. Now they would rebuild, not just the land, but the trust between the people and their leaders. The phone rang, breaking his reverie. It was Yusuf, the old man who had first given him the strength to believe in the fight. "We've done something great, Ibrahim," Yusuf said, his voice a quiet echo of triumph. "But don't forget, this is just the beginning." "I know," Ibrahim replied, his voice steady. "We've only just begun. The real work starts now. We build for the future." And as he hung up the phone, Ibrahim stood alone in the fading light, a man who had fought for his country and his people. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the hope of a brighter tomorrow. If this story moved you, consider subscribing for more tales of hope, resilience, and the courage to fight for what's right. Hit the like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it today.